very eagerly. Now, let me share my screen with you. Now, Vedic.
Yes, now it is visible.
Great, thank you. Vedic astrology is a system of knowledge which concerns itself with observation of the astronomical planetary disposition at a given moment of time and at a given location. Analysis based on standard rules as laid down by the intellectually exalted ancient sages, reaching at appropriate logical inferences, and finally prognostication based on the inferences arrived at. There is scope, of course, for further research as the application of rules formulated in ancient times needs adjustment to modern times, because the principles which were laid down in the ancient times, many of those things are not applicable today. You know, in astrology, we get planetary dispositions which, according to the ancient tests, indicate, for example, the Raj Yoga, as the term is used, for being a king. So the times of the kings are over, and therefore those combinations or those planetary dispositions today basically mean some sort of a rise in professional status. So those things we have to translate into modern times. But otherwise, the rules are very valid and they are applicable to the present times very, very eminently. In the ancient times, the royalty used astrology for guidance in matters of statecraft and for conquest. The common man used it for guidance about matters which concerned him in his daily affairs, including agriculture. Today, people use it primarily for knowing about their own future, but astrology has a very wide application and is certainly much more beyond the personal predictions. Now there are certain, I have just used this term, luminous factors, but there are certain areas or certain factors which are, giving astrology its bad name. There was a time in India when astronomy and astrology were taught as one subject. The practitioners of Ayurveda were also were encouraged to study astrology for diagnosis as well as for astrological remedies, which were also in vogue in those times. In our present times, we find some people opposed to the science of astrology for one or the other reason. And some of these important factors and the detractors of astrology, those I have mentioned here. The first one is the ostentatious, insecure, neo-literate or pseudo-literate Indian in the garb of modernity. You see, we have people who can flaunt their knowledge of English language, and they have often considered it a matter of pride to denounce anything and everything which is inherently Indian, more so if it comes from ancient Indian culture, in order to appear what they consider as modern. This happens more so when these people, they reside in India, outside India, or they, visit outside, and they feel that probably it is more modern to denounce things which are Indian. To add to this, the Indian governments until recently have failed to encourage the study of such an exalted subject as Vedic astrology. The Indian politician has often criticized astrology from the stage, what has consulted the astrologer in private. Now, thankfully, the attitudes are now changing. While the tribe of such Indians who are ashamed of their heritage is fast shrinking, they still remain a force against astrology. And I recall a very prominent astrophysicist, I don't want to name him, who has been a vociferous critic of astrology without having studied a word of the subject. So such scientists obviously need to develop a scientific attitude because you can't criticize a subject without knowing what it is. And there are many of his ilk in India even today. And they all, I think, need some sort of an evolution. I must also add with some satisfaction that many in the West are now taking up the study of astrology, Sanskrit, Vedanta in a big way. And they are often doing it with much greater zeal, sincerity, and dedication than some of our Indian students. Then the other factor which is actually not favoring the Vedic astrology is the weekly newspaper predictions. And they are great for business, but they calumniate Jyotish. These predictions do not represent Vedic astrology, but there are many who are addicted to them. Critics of astrology rightly question how only 12 signs can represent every individual on the earth. And then, sometimes there is an odd, news that comes up there, and they say there are not the 12 signs, but the 13 signs in the zodiac, and so therefore astrologers will have to rethink about their system. So these statements are made by those who have no inkling about the subject of Vedic astrology. They are ignorant about the fact that Vedic astrology is an extremely exact science, no less than the best of sciences, more elaborate than most of the other scientific disciplines. And if you actually study Vedic astrology, you will see it as elaborate as any clinical science. And we balance so many factors in clinical science to reach at a diagnosis. In astrology also, there are a host of different parameters that you have to take care of before you make any successful prediction. The third category is those who do not study but criticize astrology. These people do it out of ignorance or malice. It is a habit among many to question the veracity of anything that comes from ancient Indian culture. They would criticize astrology without studying the subject. Many of these people are well-read and literate. And the astrophysicist that I mentioned earlier, he used to write regular columns in the editorial pages of the Times of India, ferociously criticizing astrology as an unscientific discipline. As superstition, as a total hoax. So he once came up with the logic that 200 Nobel laureates had jointly signed a statement against astrology, emphasizing that it was a hoax. So astrology must be a hoax. His article, as usual, got published in the Times of India, in the editorial pages. I wrote a rebuttal to the editor of the paper, questioning how many of those Nobel laureates had actually studied astrology and then found it a hoax. Of course, my letter was not published. The Indian newspapers, especially the English language papers, would publish weekly predictions as that enhances their sale, but they would not permit you to write in favor of Vedic astrology. At another occasion, this astrophysicist came up with another article against astrology. This time, he referred to a failed INSAT 4C mission, our satellite, communication satellite. And he said that, we have identified the cause of failure in a scientific manner. We rectified the error, and then we, had another satellite, INSAT 4CR, which became a success. So where is the scope of astrology here? So I wrote another letter to the editor of the Times of India, making 2 points. I said, first of all, please go to any ordinary astrologer, and he would tell you that the time selected for the liftoff of the first rocket was flawed because it was so obvious astrologically. And I said, for the second one, please go to someone who is a little better versed in the subject, and he would tell you that the timing of the second liftoff was also flawed. And within a few days, we got the news that the satellite, the so-called successful satellite, had developed some snag, and there was some problem getting it into the right slot. My letter to the editor, of course, as expected, did not get any attention, but our calumniator stopped our further criticism in the Times of India. So that was some achievement, I think. I don't say that if you shoot a defective satellite at the right time, you will succeed. It is very important to be right in your on your technical aspect, on your scientific aspect. But then choosing the right time is also an important factor. Then there are people who are deficient in study, research, and morals. That is true of any other science. That is true of medical science also. And Vedic astrology is a subject that requires deep study, regular application of rules to the charts, continuous research, and high morals, just as in medical sciences. People who are deficient in all these aspects become a subject of ridicule themselves, and they are a cause of ridicule to the science also, which is this ridicule is heaped upon us by so many critics. It is necessary to expose these such people and stay away from them. So these are some of the factors which astrology has to deal with. We come to the next area. Astrology as a science. The dictionary definition of science you are seeing here: knowledge ascertained by observation and experiment, critically tested, systematized, brought under general principles. So, as far as astrology is concerned, astrology meets these criteria fairly eminently. Science, our ancient sages, we call them rishis, they were great scientists actually. They had great insights into the functioning of the nature. They made great observations